Very good afternoon. We're just a couple of hours away, or less than a couple of hours away from the budget speech that's to take place at 2 o'clock. And of course, we're eagerly anticipating that. Of course, the economy is in a bad state. South Africans are depressed about the situation that they're all currently enduring. Regardless of your socio-economic class, things are quite tough for everyone. Money's tight to mention, and so on and so forth. But it is expected to be a bumper year for the fiscus in terms of what they collect in terms of taxes for the 2022-2023 financial year. It's expected that they'll collect about 1.9 trillion rand. That's a bit above what was expected in February last year, which is a good thing, but it might only be a temporary thing due to the commodity boom. And of course, there are a lot of complications around the so-called commodity boom, because that's not going to last forever. And on top of that, where miners are producing material, it's very difficult for them to get it out of the country. To discuss this and other issues, I'm joined by Maarten Ackerman. He's the chief economist at Citadel. Maarten, thank you very much for talking to us as always. So we're expecting, of course, a good fiscal outcome in terms of the tax revenues for this fiscal year. Tell us more.
Yes, you're 100% right. You've basically said all of it in the intro. But so what? Yes, we're going to see much better numbers than budgeted at last year. Economic growth been stronger on the commodity cycle that we saw, better tax collection, but that's behind us. And I think South Africans are facing what's going to happen going forward. As we stand here in stage 6, 7 load shedding, economic growth expectations for this year is basically zero. So I think, it's great to know that we had a better year last year, but the focus is really going to be, what about this year?
That's right. We're now looking forward to the 2023-2024 fiscal year, which is what the budget is going to be speaking to. But important for us to know what has happened previously. Now, for this particular year, the Reserve Bank, which does work closely with National Treasury, is estimating that growth will come in at about 0.3%. And on average, over the next 3 years, will only grow at about an average of 0.7%. And of course, that's even lower than population growth, which is negative. So based on those metrics, the growth metric, what does that do to all the other important metrics like the budget deficit, our debt, and government's ability to be able to spend on those priorities that South Africans so desperately need it to?
Yeah, so all of that is under pressure again. So if you think back about 3 years ago, we were talking about the debt spiral, the fiscal cliff. Fortunately, we avoided that, given the commodity boom that we just spoke about. But now we're facing those again. There's no way that the Treasury today can see a much better growth environment compared to the Reserve Bank, because that will be unrealistic. So in a very low, almost no growth environment, you're facing, like you've said, high unemployment, because the population is still growing at 1.5%. And then you're in an environment where you're not really going to be able to get more revenue from tax collection. So what do we need to do? If we need to keep on socially support or just looking at rebuilding the infrastructure, government probably need to go back to the debt markets. And that is bad news in terms of where we already are in terms of the interest rates that we are paying. And I think if you take the rand for the last week, the rand's telling us something is going to happen. So the rand's under severe pressure because it's pricing in the fact that we're in a tight corner and we're not going to get revenue going forward to actually be able to support all the expenses that needs to be paid.
We're talking about the energy crisis. That is, the most important issue that we want government to address and National Treasury to speak to. But of course, there are lots of other problems that we're faced with in the economy. What is it that you're hoping government is going to speak to when it comes to things like Transnet and improving the logistics? We also have a potential water crisis looming as well in the country. A lot of problems.
Yes, 100%. I think, if you think how long it took for us to get to this point where we basically allow the private sector, the public sector to actually support Eskom in terms of private generating capacity, one would hope that we don't wait that long in terms of addressing some of the other structural issues. of which probably the biggest at the moment is the ports authorities, Transnet or the rail lines. So to get private sector and other funding in there to resolve that sooner rather than later, I think that is where we would like to see the focus. There's a lot of issues, but if you boil down to the big ones, it is probably Eskom and the logistical network, and that's a result of a couple of years of underinvestment or lack of investment, and that's where we need to focus now to rebuild that capacity. You've mentioned in the intro about we are in a high demand for our commodities, but it's one thing if we mine it, but we can't get it out of the ports for whatever reason. We're in a position where China is reopening. I think in the second half of this year there is going to be a potential for another commodity boom, and if we don't get our ducks in a row, we're not going to benefit from that. So the commodity cycle might be turning, but there might be another chance to actually benefit from that, but only if we actually get those issues sorted out.
There are a couple of key issues at play right now. Of course, the public sector wage discussions for next year, that is the forthcoming financial fiscal year, which is 2023-2024. And also, they're not happy. Many unions are not happy about what was given to them in the year 2022-2023. And on top of that, there's the anticipation around the basic income grant. It's been made clear to us that we're going to see the social relief of distress grant until the end of March 2024. But all of these things, they need to be funded if we're going to see increases. And we're in a context where the national elections are just around the corner, and as much as Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is a professional minister, he's our finance minister, he's also a human being and a politician. How do you think they're going to deal with those particular issues? Because South Africans are watching.
Yeah, I think every budget is a balancing act. I think the balancing act just gets so much more difficult if there's no growth. That we spoke about already, because then your tax collection you can't really rely on, and that brings us back to the debt market. And we know that the debt market, or debt as a percentage of our GDP, that's where the red lights are flickering, and that's where the rating agencies and others are saying be careful for that debt spiral, because we're in a position where 22% in the rand that we collect is actually going to paying interest. That takes money away from what we really need to spend on education or healthcare, the social grants that you refer to. So the challenge right now is in an environment where there's no growth, there is definitely social need. Whether we're in an election year or not, they would probably think about it, but the reality is that we started paying the social grants. You can't just take that away. That will really result in civil unrest. And we're in a high inflation environment, so the cost of living is biting everybody. So the thing about like the wage bill, if you now decide on a above inflation wage increase, you bake that into the cake longer term. So it's a very sensitive and delicate position where the minister finds himself to actually make sure that we can actually look after the social compact, to keep peace and prosperity longer term, but also to address the issues in terms of what we need to do to get the economy going. So there needs to be funding on both sides, business friendly, but also to look after the populace need.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Maarten, for your insights there. Maarten Ackerman, Chief Economist at Citadel, speaking about a myriad of issues around what we can expect the Minister of Finance to speak to. He talks about the importance of getting the economy going. Energy is the most important issue that needs to be dealt with, but there's several other issues that need to be dealt with. We have a very high unemployment rate in the country, particularly youth unemployment, and issues around the education system need to be fixed. We know that government spends a big proportion of its expenditure on education, but the outcomes are not what we would want to expect. There has been a mismatch between what the qualifications that youngsters come out with and what the world expects. And of course, we are in an evolving world where we have the fourth industrial revolution, and no doubt soon we're going to be heading towards a fifth industrial revolution, because things are happening so very rapidly. And those the education outcomes are not reflecting what the economy actually needs. So that's a more long-term issue that needs to be attended to. Otherwise, even if we have the energy crisis fixed tomorrow, that that remains a key burden that needs to be addressed so that South Africa can deal with its high unemployment level. There's no point in the presidential employment program creating 1 million jobs when they're really not quality jobs, because it means the prospects for those people are not that great, because at the end of the day they'll have a little short-term job, earn a bit of money, but not have that long-term benefit where they're able to contribute on a long-term basis to the economy and benefit for their own personal lives and those of their families. Many challenges that we have, but we shall overcome, we hope. It's back to you in studio.